All right, folks. Hi, good afternoon. My name is John Green. I'm Goals Director of Education and Training. I'll talk to you today a little bit about the gun safety rules. So, all depending on whether you're taking an NRA class or a USCCA class or maybe hunter education, you may hear different but similar rules. Today we're going to focus on the NRA's Big 3, also a little bit about the USCCA rules for gun safety. So let's first talk about the NRA gun safety rules. We have some really good ones here. Number 1, always keep that gun pointed in a safe direction. Number 2, always keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Number 3, always keep that gun unloaded until ready to use. What does all that mean? Well, first I think we need to determine what a safe direction is. So when we define a safe direction, we're defining a safe direction in a way where if the gun were to discharge unintentionally or accidentally, there would be no injury to person and little to no property damage. Remember, bullets are designed to break things. Flesh, bone, paper, and clay, that's what they do. Rule number 2, keeping that finger off the trigger until we're ready to shoot. Probably the hardest thing we do. Think of it. We have grasp reflexes. We have startle responses. We may not intend to press the trigger, but ultimately we do unintentionally. So let me show you where to keep that finger whenever possible. I like to choose a place that's repeatable. Right? For me, that's between the frame and the slide. That seam works well for my fingers. So off target, off trigger, looks something like this. On target, on trigger. Off, on. Don't let your finger dangle out here when you don't want it to, because it will go towards the trigger. Trust me on that one. Right? This moment we enter into discourse, it's going right to the trigger, unless you have a consistent place to keep it off the trigger. Again, frame, slide, seam works good for me. And then finally, number 3, always keep that gun unloaded until you're ready to use it. Sounds simple enough. Let me give you an example. The guns that are in the safe for competition and recreation and hunting, unloaded. The guns we store in the home for personal protection in the home, those guns are loaded as possibly can be in compliance with, unfortunately, Massachusetts state gun law. Right? So, not a big fan of keeping a gun with a magazine in the magazine well, but no cartridge in the chamber. That's just a training scar. Take good classes, take good training, and you will learn that it is reasonable and efficient to keep that gun fully loaded. But another tip that's going to complement that, make sure your trigger guard's covered if you're drawing from an instant access safe or something like that. Never keep a loaded gun with the trigger uncovered for personal protection. Goes well as to why we use holsters. So those are the NRA Big 3. You can take a look online. There are 8 additional rules for using and storing a gun, i.e. know the target's environment and what is beyond, wear quality eye and hearing protection. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the USCCA and their 3 general rules for firearm safety. They mix it up a little bit compared to the NRA. Their first rule is we're to keep our finger high off the trigger until we have identified the threat and made the determination that we need to fire on that threat. So similar to the NRA, I like to keep my finger in that seam where the frame meets the slide. Again, we're keeping that finger in a consistent place other than the trigger until we have identified the threat and we've made that determination that we need to deploy the gun, we need to fire that gun. Their second rule is to keep the gun pointed in a generally safe direction. So we can defer back to the NRA's rule number 1 on that, right? We've already defined what a generally safe direction is, i.e. if the gun were to discharge, there would be no injury to person and little to no property damage. Their third rule, and my favorite, is the big picture rule. Remember, we have a firearm in our hands, and when that firearm is handled carelessly or maliciously with malice, you can hurt yourself or somebody else. So always be thinking, it's a firearm. If I handle it and use it correctly, we're in good shape. If we handle it with malice, carelessly, we're putting ourselves and others in jeopardy. Take a look at the Goal webpage for additional tips.